Greetings, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Nick Filet, and I'm here with my colleagues Bridler Graves, Sam Finch, Misty Friel, and Brooklyn Priest. Together, we'll be discussing a vital problem: the lack of legal protections and rights for transgender Ohioans. This is a pressing issue that impacts many lives across Ohio. Our objective is to shed light on the challenges faced by trans individuals in our state and to highlight the urgent need for protective measures. It's important to remember that behind every statistic and policy, there are real people being impacted who are deserving of empathy, respect, and safety. I wanted to take a quick minute to give a special thank you to members of the community who allowed me to interview them for this project and share a quote that really spoke to our group from Desmond Tutu. "If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse and you say that you are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality." As we explore the target population, I wanted to define a few key terms. It is crucial to recognize the diverse identities within the trans community. Let's start with the term transgender. This is an umbrella term for people whose gender identity or expression differs from cultural expectations based on the sex they were assigned at birth. Moving on to non-binary, this term encompasses individuals whose gender identity is not limited to strictly male or female. Gender identity is about one's internal sense or experience of their gender. For those who might not be familiar, Two-Spirit is a term used in many American Indian tribal religions to describe gender-diverse people who are seen as embodying both masculine and feminine spirits. Lastly, cisgender refers to individuals whose gender identity matches the sex they were assigned at birth. Taking a look at the challenges faced by transgender youth, this is definitely a group that requires our immediate attention and support. Considering the data, transgender high school students in Ohio experience significantly higher rates of poor mental health, unstable housing, and homelessness compared to their cisgender peers. In fact, 30% report physical harassment or assault due to their gender identity. Let's talk about legislation. Ohio has several laws directly impacting trans youth, such as forced outing policies and restrictions on inclusive curriculums. These not only infringe on their rights, but also contribute to a hostile environment. Banning trans youth from participating in school sports and restricting access to school facilities creates barriers and further isolates these young people. It's also crucial to understand the broader implications of these challenges. Nationally, nearly half of trans and non-binary youth have seriously considered suicide, and a significant percentage have attempted it. This is not just data, these are real lives at risk. Discrimination remains rampant, with 65% of trans and non-binary youth reporting such experiences in the past year alone. The mental health repercussions are severe, with transgender adolescents being significantly more likely to experience suicidal ideation and attempts than their cisgender counterparts. Taking a look at the data surrounding disparities amongst trans adults, transgender individuals face significantly higher risks when it comes to mental health and substance use. For instance, they are 1.8 times more likely to engage in binge drinking and 2.8 times more likely to be diagnosed with depression compared to their cisgender peers. The statistics are stark. 42% of trans adults have attempted suicide, and an overwhelming 81% have experienced suicidal thoughts. Within the trans community, non-binary individuals endure even greater disparities. They are 3 times more likely to experience serious psychological distress and 6 times more likely to have considered suicide recently compared to transgender men. Taking a look at some of the policy and legal landscape unmet needs in the state of Ohio includes addressing harmful policies currently in place, establishing legal protections against gender identity discrimination in 5 key areas, including healthcare access, employment, housing, academic settings, and public accommodations, creating a safer environment in the school setting, making it a hate crime for anti-transgender violence, increasing mental health funding streams for trans youth and adults, improving training for providers, and streamlining the legal process for gender marker and name changes and other identity documents. This graphic is from the Movement Advancement Project. It kind of takes a picture of the current Ohio conversion therapy bans. So as you can see, there is no statewide protection. Only one of the 88 counties in Ohio has a county-wide protection, and then only 14 cities in the state have an ordinance that prohibits conversion therapy for minors. This makes it where a total of only 28% of the state's population is protected right now. This graphic is also from the Movement Advancement Project. It takes a look similarly at the current Ohio gender identity protections. So again, there is no statewide protection. Only 31% of the population is fully protected, and they define that as being protected against discrimination in private employment, housing, and public accommodations. So that doesn't take into account things like the school setting. Next, we wanted to take a moment to address 2 critical areas that are impacting the trans community. employment and economic disparities, along with the ever-present threat of anti-trans violence. Trans adults face significant barriers in the workforce. They're twice as likely to be unemployed compared to their cisgender counterparts. Even when qualifications are similar or better, transgender workers earn significantly less, a staggering 32% less. Workplace discrimination remains a harsh reality, with 42% of trans workers having reported facing discrimination in hiring, job retention, or promotion due to their gender identity. In Ohio, the stats are particularly concerning, with 16% of trans individuals unemployed and 26% living in poverty. 36% have experienced issues related to ID mismatches, such as harassment or denial of services. Shifting to the issue of safety, we observe that anti-trans violence continues to be a grave concern. The Transgender Day of Remembrance, observed annually on November 20th, highlights the ongoing violence faced by the community. In 2024, over 426 names were added globally, including victims from Ohio, Amiri Jane Reed, and Kasim Omar. The 2025 USA list included at least 26 identified names, including Laura Schuler, age 47, of Cincinnati, Ohio. This violence underscores the need for societal change. We wish to emphasize the significance of recognizing gender identity and gender expression as a legitimate, vital aspect of individual identity. The NASW emphasizes that social workers must champion protections, ensuring full civil protections for LGBTQIA2S+ individuals. Consider this. Legislation targeting trans individuals isn't just discriminatory, it's a critical human rights issue. Trans communities face heightened risks of education and economic challenges, homelessness, and mental health struggles. The NASW's advocacy for banning discrimination and conversion therapy reflects a commitment to social justice as mandated by their code of ethics. In Ohio specifically, the lack of gender identity protections perpetuates systematic discrimination. It's concerning that nearly 43% of LGBTQ+ adults would consider relocating if gender-affirming care bans were enacted. With thousands already leaving due to the hostile policies in the state, it's clear that change is imperative. As future social workers, it will be important we continue to support policies that protect and uplift our trans communities, because it's not just about the policies themselves. It's about the dignity, safety, and the right to thrive as a human being, respecting the self-determination of trans individuals. Here were the references that I utilized.
Hi y'all, I'm Bridler, and I'm just going to be going over the ideas that we considered. Before choosing our final intervention, our group brainstormed a few possible strategies for what the final product could look like. This included creating an infographic using the data from the 2025 needs assessment survey that we made for transgender individuals living in Ohio to present to state legislators. We thought about preparing an elevator speech, which is just like a short persuasive speech delivered at the NASW Advocacy Day. We also discussed writing a letter to Ohio state legislators addressing harmful anti-trans policies that are currently in Ohio law and just pushing for change and reform. We also discussed creating a focus group of just gathering members of the transgender community to discuss their lived experiences and what changes they want to see, so the policy priorities that they wanted. We also briefly discussed creating a policy briefing, which would just be a formal summary document outlining the issue, data, and recommended policy changes, but ultimately it was really similar to our other ideas and what we did end up going with. So for our chosen intervention, it was to draft and propose a new piece of Ohio state legislation that would expand on legal rights and protections for transgender Ohioans. We would be calling this bill the Transgender Bill of Rights for Ohioans, or Protect Transgender Ohioans Act. Just a little explanation to go over it. It would target the root problem, so the laws and policies that are already in place. So our needs assessment showed that there's a major lack of unmet statewide legal protections for gender identity in areas such as employment, housing, healthcare, education, and public accommodations, as well as a big wave of anti-trans policies that have been put in place under our new administration. So we'd be drafting a comprehensive bill directly addressing this structural issue rather than just treating the individual issues or symptoms at place. Prevention and remediation. So the proposed legislation is designed to be both preventative, so stop future harm through anti-discrimination protections and access to gender-affirming care, and then also corrective by amending current discriminatory practices and just filling in the gaps where there's not already protections in place for these individuals, just so that all grounds are covered. It would also build on existing community assets. So Ohio already has a large network of trans-led organizations and LGBTQIA plus centers, support groups, and legal centers. So our plan intentionally partners with these stakeholders to gather data and testimonies and stories that will not only help inform people on our bill, but it would also increase its legitimacy. It would be grounded in, and this kind of goes with what I was saying prior, it would be grounded in data and lived experiences. So the bill would be informed by published research on discrimination, mental health, and suicide risk among trans people. There would be state level data showing gaps in protections and high rates of harassment and poverty, which we went over in our needs assessments. And then there would also be a clear measurable impact. So that's why you should donate to our organization, because we can actually show you an outline of the change that's going to be made. It's going to expand on discrimination practices, improve access to gender affirming care, reduce legal and social vulnerability for trans Ohioans, and potentially decrease negative outcomes such as suicidal ideations, discrimination in services, and trans individuals migrating out of Ohio, which that we're also going to touch on a little bit more in the next slide. The description of the product, so what the final product includes, is the proposed bill will be a statewide non-discrimination protection for gender identity in employment, housing, healthcare, education, and public accommodations. It would provide protection of access to gender affirming healthcare in not only youth but adults as well, or not only adults but youth as well. It would repeal or amend any harmful existing policies, such as those restricting restroom access, sports participation, and recognition of preferred pronouns and names in the school setting. Processes for legal name and gender marking changes would be more affordable and accessible to people, which would be great on their mental health and overall well-being. There'd be clear protections in school settings, so we'd be addressing privacy issues, bullying, confidentiality, and participation in extracurricular activities, so like sports and whatnot, because that's been an issue recently. Human rights and civil liberty protection, so it would align with NASW Code of Ethics and evidence on the harmful effects of discrimination. This product is supported by the data in our needs assessment, interviews with the trans community that we did multiple of those, testimony from advocacy groups, and research highlighting mental health impacts, discrimination, and policy gaps. All this information will be used to justify our bill and the specific components. The purpose of the product. So this is a policy-based and systematic solution that prevents harm and protects rights, and it would promote the well-being of transgender individuals, or Ohioans specifically. It addresses the problem at the broadest and most impactful level, so state law, while aligning with social work values of social justice, dignity, and human rights. It would increase legal protections, so it would add explicit statewide protections for gender identity and employment, housing, healthcare, education, public accommodation, and filling in current gaps. It would counteract harmful existing policies by outlining affirming protective standards for restroom access, school policies, sports, and gender affirming care. It would just reduce discrimination and violence with clear non-discrimination standards and enforcement mechanisms. The policy aims to lower rates of harassment, denial of services, and violence that transgender Ohioans currently report at extremely high levels, unfortunately, within the workplace and schools, housing, and just public spaces in general. It would improve mental health and safety outcomes by reducing the legal and social discrimination. It would support stability in education, work, and housing. Said that. This is another big one. It would reduce out migration of trans residents, so individuals that are trans leaving Ohio because Ohio isn't safe for them to live in. So we would provide protection so that all are welcome to stay and feel comfortable. And then it would advance social work values and human rights. The intervention directly operationalizes with NASW values, challenging structural injustices and promoting human rights by moving from individual advocacy to systemic and policy level change.
Before we jump into the Protect Transgender Ohio Act, first we want to look at some of the laws that they already have on the books that are discriminatory against transgender individuals. Firstly, we have SB 104. This law mandates that facilities like restrooms and locker rooms be designated by biological sex only. We also have HB6H, which dictates athletic teams in public schools and colleges must be single sex based on the sex assigned at birth. Lastly, we have HB8, which requires schools to notify parents about any changes in a student's services or well-being, including if a student wishes to be recognized by the gender different from their sex assigned at birth. The Protect Transgender Ohio Act will change the harmful effects and laws on the books. First, the act will allow students to use restrooms and locker rooms that align with their gender identity, except biological sex only. Second, invasive verification procedures for transgender athletes will be prohibited. Third, the act will mandate district-wide policies that promote gender-affirming anti-discrimination laws. Finally, we will establish a task force that will help monitor the implementation of these changes. This task force will ensure the policies are effective and adapt as needed. The Protect Transgender Ohio's Act is expected to enhance social cohesion and build public trust. Studies like Flores in 2020 indicate that when people are accepted and supported, communities thrive. Another benefit is the improvement of mental health. The Trevor Project asserts that the Trevor Project in 2020 asserts that when transgender individuals are validated and supported, their mental health significantly improves. Finally, the Act aims to reduce bullying and improve the overall school climate, as highlighted by Glenn's 2022, by fostering a safe and supportive environment. If the Protect Transgender Ohio Act is not adopted, there will be negative impacts, and we're going to look into some of those negative impacts. One concern is bathroom-related discrimination. The Society for Adolescent Health shows that this type of bullying increased rates of depressive mood, suicidal ideation, and suicide attempts. Other negative impacts are significant. The study of 10,000 transgender and gender diverse adolescents shows that participation in sports will lower depressive and anxiety symptoms among transgender youths. Other negative impacts. Research shows that forced outing can lead to severe consequences. It increases the likelihood of family rejection. This rejection is strongly associated with high levels of depression, anxiety, and suicidality among transgender adolescents. Now that we've looked at the positive and negative impacts of this law, the positive impacts of it being enforced and the negative impacts if it's not adopted, in order to make this a reality, we have to have what it would cost financially for this to happen. Here we have our budget. We got personnel for $2,000. We have outreach for $500. We have things for analyzing software. We got community engagement for $750. Those are things like booth at Pride events, food and snacks. The biggest chunk of our budget is going to be the $30,000 for incentives, and that's going to come in the form of gift cards. 20 of those for 1,500 participants for focus groups and interview incentives. And we got partnership development. That's going to be $300 to community partners. Administrative supplies, that's going to be $475. And of course, we put in a 10% buffer in case we can run across unexpected expenses. And this ends up being a total of $34,825. Let's talk about the funding opportunity that's available to support our initiatives. We have a $25,000 grant from the Cleveland Foundation LGBTQ Opportunity Fund. We have a fund from the Transformation Fund. This fund offers grants ranging from $10,000 to $20,000 specifically for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, as well as LGBT communities. The Open Society Foundation offers a significant grant opportunity called the Equity Fellows. This grant provides $130,000 over 18 months. It's designed to support projects like ours that focus on legislation reform, particularly for the protection of transgender rights. Finally, we need to look into volunteer or free resources as we continue exploring these partners. We have the ACLU of Ohio, which provides access to legal experts and training for groups in advocacy. Next, we have National Center for Transgender Equality, and this offers skilled litigators and community organizers. And finally, the Human Rights Campaign, one of the largest LGBTQ plus civil rights organizations, offers policy analysis and connects with legislators who are allies.
Hi, my name is Misty Friel, and this is my part of the project for 4503. Cultural and diversity issues that impact our target population. Systems of power decide what is culturally appropriate by society standards. They do this by defining social norms. Dominant groups use these norms to stay in power and use formal and informal means of control to stay in control. Those who fall outside these normal dominant expectations, such as members of the transgender community, face harsh consequences. Discrimination and oppression occur when dominant groups use these norms to stay in power and inflict unequal treatment on those marginalized communities. Formal and informal means of control include informal means of control, microaggressions such as purposeful misgendering of transgender individuals, rejection from family members, violence and threats of violence, bullying and harassment in schools, workplaces, and social engagements, stereotyping and purposeful misrepresentation by the media. Formal means of control, no legal protections banning discriminations based on gender identity in healthcare, education, and housing, limited access to legal identification with the appropriate gender marker or legal name change, laws banning access to gender affirming care and services, and insurance exclusions to care. School restricted access to bathrooms, locker rooms, and overnight accommodations, policies in the workplace that deny gender identity and expression, transgender bans in the United States military. Intersectionality. This is when members of the transgender community can hold multiple marginalized identities concerning race, ethnicity, disabilities, religion, and social economic strain. These members encounter additional barriers in society due to the convergence of these identities, which adds to the discrimination members of this community already face. Strategies used to address issues. We had to assess and build on available power bases, such as legitimate, referent, expert, and informational, within the power that they use, such as collective power, to challenge systems of power and their oppressive means of control. This means looking at the power of ourselves, others, and within the community to achieve our goal of writing this intervention. Strategies used to address cultural and diverse issues. 1. Made use of existing power. For expert, referent, and legitimate power, we sought out transgender organizations and advocacy groups. These power bases directly impact the transgender community through advocacy, resources, referrals, and support. These power bases give credibility to our intervention and offer connection to ongoing advocacy campaigns. 2. Build power through organization. Collective power means building together towards our common goal of policy reform. We partnered with these organizations to assess the needs of the community and formulate a plan of action towards policy reform. 3. Developed additional personal power. We expanded on our expert and informational power bases by conducting personal interviews with members of the transgender community to gain insight with cultural humility from members of the transgender community and apply that to the design of the intervention. We must always remember nothing about them without them. Descriptions of the participants. These are leadership roles, workers, one-shot participants, advisors, and inactive supporters. Participants' name: Nick Violet, Bradley Graves, Sam Fitch, Misty Friel, and Brooklyn Priest. This is the leadership team, the program managers, the most active in the project. Group members drove the efforts by analyzing data, collecting qualitative and quantitative research, and collaborated on the design of the intervention. The members were responsible for the final decisions towards the final product. Their input. Group members shared in writing the project contract, the group proposal, needs assessment, the budget analysis, and the final group presentation to include the intervention. The group collected information from the community and applied this information towards the design of the intervention. Gage Gatlin, Booby Brooks, Mary Raylan. These are the workers. These are the people doing the day-to-day work, are active in the operation, and have an ongoing role in challenging the systems of power. They did not write the intervention, but without them, without their continued work towards the goal of policy reform, we couldn't have accomplished this. This is something they do daily. These members are the leaders of the advocacy groups. They provide ongoing resources, support, and knowledge about and for the transgender community. These workers provided the qualitative data for the intervention by providing their lived experience as community members and shared their experience as advocates working within and for the transgender community. Their continued efforts as change agents made this project possible. Jenna Bowen and Sylvia Neverest, one-shot participants. These two community members provided insight with a short but meaningful one-time response. These one-shot participants shared a quick but meaningful soundbite on the resilience of the community to aid in the intervention. Nick Violet. Not only was he on the leadership team, but he's also an advisor to the project. Nick provided his expertise and knowledge of his advocacy experience as a member of the transgender community. Nick provided this experience as a grassroots organizer, his perspective of the resources within the transgender community, and the statewide lack of legal protections in the state of Ohio. Trans Ohio, Trans Allies of Ohio, Equatus, have a gay day. Inactive group supporters. These statewide organizations give credibility to the intervention. These groups indirectly provide name recognition to be used towards statewide changes in legal policy. Thank you.
Evaluation plan. We have community participation and engagement, organizational and volunteer collaboration, and policy and advocacy outcomes. For community participation and engagement, it tracks how many transgender Ohioans participate in the needs assessment and from which regions. It also measures diversity across age, race, gender identity, and geography. This ensures broad representation. We can also assess the depth of participation input, especially detailed concerns, needs, and recommendations. It is also easy to collect follow-up feedback through interviews or short qualitative surveys. This would evaluate whether the participants felt heard, respected, and accurately represented. Strong participation and rich qualitative narratives indicate meaningful community engagement. Organizational and volunteer collaboration. This documents all partner organizations, including the legal groups, LGBTQ plus advocates, nonprofits, and university partners. It also evaluates the contributions of student volunteers and social work interns, especially in outreach and data collection. You can also assess the consistency and quality of collaboration, including meeting attendance, communication, and the follow-through. There is strong responsive partnership signal, and this is a well-coordinated and sustainable intervention. Policy and advocacy outcomes. This tracks the development of all advocacy materials, such as policy proposals, policy briefs, legislative recommendations, and fact sheets. It also documents how many policymakers were contacted, the quality of meetings, and whether the legislators agreed to sponsor or co-sponsor bills. These indicators reveal whether the intervention is influencing policy systems, institutional practices, and public discourse. Evaluation plan continued. Resource and funding acquisition and measurable community impact. Resource and funding acquisition tracks the project's success in securing funding from sources such as the Cleveland Foundation LGBTQ Plus Opportunity Fund. It also secures funding for the Soros Justice Fellowship. We can also monitor how grant funds were allocated and evaluate how volunteer support from advocacy organizations reduced expenses and expanded project capacity. There is a lot of success in funding and efficient resources used to demonstrate organizational credibility and sustainability. Measurable community impact. This would ask transgender Ohioans whether they feel more informed about their rights, more connected to affirming resources, or more confident engaging in advocacy. It could also help them track improvements in school, workplace safety, access to gender-affirming services, and reduce exposure to discrimination. It would also increase visibility of transgender right issues, and stronger community networks signal that intervention is producing real, positive social impact. Expected impact. Strengthen legal protections, increase community capacity, reduction of adverse outcomes, and strengthen networks of support. Strengthen legal protections. Advocate for statewide policies that protect transgender people in their employment, their housing, healthcare, education, and public accommodations. It also addresses gaps in Ohio law by pushing for legislation that secures civil rights and ensures safety for transgender residents. It also strengthens legal infrastructure that protects individuals from discrimination, harassment, and denial of care. Increase community capacity. Collaborating with legal experts, organizers, and community groups to enhance community advocacy skills and knowledge. It also utilizes support from groups like the NCTE and ACLU Ohio. This provides accurate, accessible information on transgender rights. It also empowers transgender individuals to engage confidently in civic participation, public testimony, and policy advocacy. Reduction of adverse outcomes. This works towards safe schools, clinics, and community settings for transgender individuals. It also reduces barriers to gender-affirming care by addressing policy restrictions and misinformation. It also aims to lower incidents of violence, harassment, and suicidal ideation and self-harm by improving protections and support access. Lastly, it enhances long-term health and safety by creating trauma-informed affirming systems. Strengthening networks of support. Builds interconnected support systems with nonprofits, legal advocates, campus organizations, and volunteers. It also engages social work students and community volunteers to expand their outreach capacity. It strengthens coordinated resource networks that would provide legal, emotional, educational, and social support, while enhancing community resilience through strong partnerships and shared advocacy goals. Justice frameworks. Human rights, social justice, racial justice, economic justice, and environmental justice. Human rights. Ohio's anti-trans bills, care restrictions, and forced outing policies represent violations of fundamental human rights. Our interventions focus on restoring dignity, autonomy, and equitable treatment for transgender people. It also advocates for a rights-based approach that ensures safety, respect, and legal recognition. Social justice. directly confronts systematic discrimination embedded in schools, workplaces, healthcare systems, and public environments. It also elevates trans-led advocacy and honors community resilience in the face of hostile political climates, as well as promoting structural change that shifts systems towards fairness, inclusion, and accountability. Racial justice. This recognizes that Black transgender women face disproportionate violence and criminalization. It also uses an intersectional lens to ensure policies do not reinforce racial disparities, while prioritizing the safety and voices of transgender people of color in the needs assessment and in advocacy efforts. Economic justice. This addresses economic inequities such as wage gaps, unemployment discrimination, and poverty risk. It also advocates for anti-discrimination protections that expand access to stable employment, housing, and financial security, as well as seeks to improve economic mobility through policy reform and resource expansion. Environmental justice. This frames environmental as the social and institutional spaces that transgender people navigate daily. It highlights harm caused by unsafe schools, hostile political climates, and inadequate relocation support, while working to create safe, affirming environments across education, healthcare, workplaces, and communities through policy change. It also ensures transgender individuals have environments free from fear, stigma, and structural violence.